America can win battles, so why can't it win the war? The Strait America can't reopen. The United States has the most powerful military the world has ever seen. It has stealth bombers, aircraft carriers, satellites that can read a license plate from orbit, and right now Iran has been able to keep one of the most important waterways on Earth dangerous enough to disrupt global shipping, using a mix of mines, missile threats, and attacks on commercial vessels that costs a fraction of what it takes to defend against. That's not a hypothetical, that's the Strait of Hormuz right now in 2026. About a fifth of the world's oil moves through that strip of water, and for months Iran has made that passage risky enough that shipping companies are rerouting. Insurance costs are spiking, and the US Navy, the same Navy that can flatten a country's air defenses in a night, hasn't been able to make it fully safe again. So here's the question we're actually going to answer today. If America can win almost every battle in this war, why can't it seem to win the war itself? And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why that gap between winning battles and winning wars might be the most important story in global power right now. Not just for the Middle East, for Europe, for Taiwan, for anywhere the US has promised to show up. Let's start with what actually happened. What America actually achieved. Before we get into any of that, let's be fair to the US military here. On February the 28th, 2026, the US and Israel launched a coordinated strike on Iran. Within hours, they killed Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, a man who had run the country since 1989. They hit a long list of military and government targets. This wasn't some limited symbolic strike, it was a real sustained campaign, and by early March, Iran's conventional military and air defense network had taken serious damage. Think about what that actually required. Months of intelligence work tracking the leader of Iran patiently enough to know exactly where he would be on a specific morning, then a coordinated Israeli strike backed by US intelligence that hit the target in a single window before he could move. This is worth saying clearly. Nothing about what comes next in this video is America is weak or America can't fight. If this were a straightforward measuring contest whose air force is bigger, whose precision weapons are better, whose intelligence network is more capable, this isn't close. The US wins that contest decisively. So, if the US was that dominant on the battlefield, why are we even having this conversation? Why is Iran still able to hold a global choke point hostage 5 months later? Why hasn't the war that started with a knockout blow actually ended? That gap between what the military can destroy and what the country can actually achieve is where things get interesting. Let's get into it. Tactical win, strategic non-win. Here's the distinction that most coverage of this war completely skips over, and is the one you actually need to understand everything that follows. Winning battles and winning wars are not the same thing. You can be devastatingly good at the first one and still fail at the second. Look at what the US and Israel set out to do back in February: kill the regime's leadership, cripple Iran's nuclear program, and reopen the Strait of Hormuz for good. Now look at where things actually stand 5 months later. Iran's government is still standing, its nuclear file is still unresolved. Reports this month suggest the US may settle for delayed rather than destroyed. And Hormuz still contested. Iran has repeatedly tested a ceasefire and a follow-up agreement, firing on commercial ships as recently as this July. So the campaign was a tactical success. Almost every individual strike did what it was supposed to do. But the war hasn't produced the outcome it was fought for. That's not a contradiction. It's actually the normal pattern of modern warfare against a determined, geographically difficult opponent. You can win every engagement and still not get the political result you went to war for. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for planners in Washington, because the next question is obvious. If total air dominance wasn't enough to finish this, what would it actually take? And is that price something the US is even willing to pay again? That question is exactly why the Pentagon is fighting so hard right now to control the story about what this war has cost, which brings us to the number that actually explains it. The missile problem. So let's talk about what this war has actually cost, not in dollars, but in something more immediate: stockpiles. Two systems matter most here: Patriot and THAAD. Those are the interceptors that shoot down incoming missiles before they hit a base, a ship, or a city. Before this war started, the US had roughly 2,300 of the most advanced Patriot interceptors. According to estimates published this month by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, that number has fallen to fewer than 830. THAAD tells the same story. From about 450 interceptors down to under 280 by the same analysis. I want to be precise about what kind of claim this is. These are outside analyst estimates, not an official Pentagon inventory disclosure. The Pentagon doesn't publish exact stockpile numbers for obvious reasons. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has publicly pushed back on reports calling the stockpile dangerously low. But the direction of the trend isn't really in dispute. Multiple independent outlets and analysts have converged on the same story, and separately, CEAS estimates it could take 2 to 3 years, maybe longer, to rebuild these stockpiles to pre-war levels. Here's why that matters beyond this one conflict. These interceptors aren't just for Iran. They're the same systems protecting US forces in Europe, in the Indo-Pacific, and the same systems allies depend on when they buy into American-made air defense. When Iran or a Houthi cell fires drones at a base in the Gulf, that comes out of the same pool of interceptors that would need to be available if something happened with Russia or with China over Taiwan. There isn't a separate stockpile for each front. It's one shrinking pile, and this war has been drawing it down fast. And that draws us into the actual economics of this problem, because the imbalance isn't just about how many interceptors are left. It's about what it costs to build the thing that's attacking you versus what it costs to shoot it down. And once you see that math, you understand why this isn't a problem you can just spend your way out of quickly. Let's break that down next. The economics of shooting down a $30,000 drone. Here's a number that should worry anyone in the Pentagon a lot more than headlines about troop numbers or aircraft carriers. An Iranian Shahed drone, the kind that's been swarming US bases and Gulf allies for months, costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 to build by most reporting. A single Patriot interceptor, the missile the US fires to shoot one of those drones down, costs around $4 million. Some estimates put the newest variant even higher than that. Sit with that ratio for a second. You are spending roughly 100 times more to stop the weapon than your enemy spent to build it. And Iran doesn't need every drone to get through. It just needs enough of them, often enough, that the cost of defending against them becomes unbearable before the cost of building them does. This isn't a new problem, either. It's the same math that's been draining Ukraine's air defenses against Russian Shahed swarms for 2 years. And here's one of the more surprising details to come out of this war. Reporting indicates that around March, the US reached out to Ukraine for help, and Ukraine sent its own interceptor drones and specialists to help protect American bases in Jordan. Drones that reportedly cost somewhere in the ballpark of $1,000 to a few $1,000s each instead of millions. If that holds up, it's a remarkable detail. The country that's been fighting off Iranian-designed drones the longest ended up teaching the US military how to defend itself against the same threat. That tells you two things. First, that cheap drone warfare isn't a Middle East problem or a Ukraine problem. It's becoming the baseline threat everywhere. And second, that the world's most expensive military has started leaning on someone else's cheaper solution just to keep the math from getting worse. When the most advanced defense industry on the planet has to import a fix from a country it's still sending aid to, that's not a footnote, that's a signal. And it's a signal about something even bigger than money. It's about the entire model America has used to project power since the end of World War II, a model that assumes its bases, ships, and forces can operate without being under constant threat. That assumption is what's actually breaking down here. Let's talk about why. Sanctuary becomes contested sanctuary. For 80 years, American military power has rested on one core assumption: that the US could build up forces, ships, and bases somewhere relatively safe, then choose when and how to use them. Military planners call this a sanctuary, a place your enemy can't effectively reach, so you can operate from it without constantly being under threat yourself. Aircraft carriers have functioned as sanctuaries. Forward air bases in allied countries have functioned as sanctuaries. The continental United States, protected by two oceans, is the biggest sanctuary of all. This is the entire logic behind America's ability to fight wars far from home while staying safe itself. Now, I want to be careful with the claim here because it's easy to overstate. The continental US isn't suddenly vulnerable to an Iranian drone swarm. A carrier isn't doomed just because an adversary owns some anti-ship missiles. An airbase doesn't become unusable overnight just because it's theoretically within someone's range. None of these assets have disappeared or become obsolete. What's actually changed is narrower but still huge. These assets can no longer be assumed to operate with impunity. Iran's drones and missiles reached US bases across a dozen countries in the opening week of this war alone. Gulf allies hosting American forces got hit directly. None of that required Iran to match American technology. It just required cheap, mass-producible weapons in large enough numbers, launched from close enough range. The sanctuary hasn't vanished, it's become contested. And this isn't unique to Iran. Ukraine has been hitting targets deep inside Russia for months. The Houthis, a group with a fraction of a real state's resources, have disrupted shipping through the Red Sea for over 2 years using the same basic toolkit: cheap missiles and drones launched at scale. What used to require the budget and technology of a great power is now available to a regional force, a militia, or a country under sanctions. So here's the uncomfortable question this raises for the United States and for anyone who depends on American protection. Once your safest assets are merely contested instead of safe, what does that actually mean for the next conflict? What does it mean somewhere with even less warning and even higher stakes? To answer that, we need to follow this pattern one step further, because it isn't just Iran that's figured this out, it's spreading and fast. The democratization of deep strike. Here's the pattern once you start looking for it. The ability to hit targets hundreds or thousands of kilometers away with real precision used to belong to about 5 countries on Earth. Now it belongs to basically anyone willing to invest in it. Take Ukraine. 3 years ago, 3 years ago, its long-range strike capability was mostly borrowed. Western missiles, limited numbers, tight restrictions on what could be hit and how far. Today, Ukraine is building its own weapons at scale. Its Flamingo cruise missile has a reported range of around 3,000 kilometers and a reported warhead over 1,000 kilograms, heavier than most Western equivalents. And the price tag is the part that should really get your attention. A reported cost of roughly $1.5 million per missile, an order of magnitude cheaper than the Western systems it's replacing. Ukraine has stated a goal of eventually producing thousands of these a year. Worth flagging that some of these specifics come from Ukrainian government and manufacturer statements rather than independent verification, so treat the exact numbers as reported rather than confirmed. Think about what that actually means, even allowing for some uncertainty in the specifics. A country that didn't have a serious domestic missile industry a few years ago is now building weapons that can reportedly reach deep into a country the size of Russia for a fraction of what it cost the US or Europe to build the same capability. That's not a fluke. That's what happens once the technology and manufacturing know-how spreads. And this isn't limited to state militaries, with a UN Security Council seat backing them. Iran built its arsenal the same way. The Houthis, with none of Iran's resources, have used drones and missiles to disrupt one of the world's busiest shipping lanes for over 2 years. What used to require billions in research and development and decades of institutional knowledge now increasingly requires an industrial base, an engineering pipeline, and the will to spend on it. So here's the real question this raises, and it's bigger than any single country. Once this capability is available to regional powers, to non-state groups, to anyone with the budget and the intent, who's actually still out of reach? Who gets to assume they're safe just because they're powerful or because an ocean sits between them and trouble? For decades, the answer included America's allies in Europe. That assumption is exactly what's being tested right now, closer to home than you might think. What this means for Europe. So let's bring this back to somewhere that actually affects you directly if you live anywhere near NATO's eastern border. Here's a detail that tells you almost everything about where trust inside the alliance actually stands right now. In late March, as Gulf allies burned through interceptors defending against Iranian strikes, the US informally asked Poland to consider transferring one of its 2 Patriot batteries and its PAC-3 interceptors to the Middle East. Poland's defense minister rejected the idea publicly the same day the request was reported, posting that Poland's Patriot batteries exist to protect Polish skies and NATO's eastern flank, and that nothing about that was changing. It's worth being precise here. This was reportedly an informal, unofficial approach rather than a formal demand, and Poland was the only NATO member to put its refusal on the public record in this way. Other allies' responses to related requests were reported with less clarity. Sit with that for a second. This is the same alliance that treats an attack on one member as an attack on all. And when informally asked to help, a frontline ally said no because it needed to protect itself first. That's not a betrayal, it's actually rational. And it's exactly the abandonment versus entrapment tension that alliances have always struggled with. Smaller states worry the bigger power will drag them into wars they didn't choose. But they also worry the bigger power won't be there when they actually need it. This war just gave every European capital a live demonstration of both fears at once. And that's exactly why Poland isn't waiting around. It's currently spending close to 4.8% of GDP on defense, among the highest in NATO, and building its own layered air and missile defense system along its eastern border, a mix of physical barriers, drone defense, and missile shields, largely funded and built without depending on the US showing up with reinforcements. That's not a country assuming the cavalry is coming. That's a country building its own cavalry just in case. This is the part that matters most for anyone watching from outside the Middle East. The lesson of this war isn't really about Iran. It's that the sanctuary model, the industrial base to sustain a long fight, and the assumption of unconditional backup from a stronger ally, all three are being quietly renegotiated in real time. And Europe is one of the first places acting on it instead of just talking about it. But there's a bigger, scarier version of this same question waiting in the wings. One involving a country with a far larger military, a far bigger missile arsenal, and a conflict that could make Iran look like a war map. Let's talk about China. The China problem. Everything we've just walked through, the missile shortages, the cost asymmetry, the contested sanctuary problem, all of it gets dramatically worse the moment you swap Iran for China. Here's the connection nobody in Washington wants to say out loud. The same Patriot and THAAD interceptors that got burned through fighting Iran are the exact systems the US would rely on to defend Taiwan and its own bases across the Pacific. It's not two separate stockpiles, it's one shrinking pile of the most advanced interceptors America has, and Iran already spent a huge chunk of it. A review published just last week by the Heritage Foundation put it about as bluntly as an analysis like that ever does. After 6 months of the Iran war, US interceptor stocks have fallen so low that American forces may not have what they would need to defend Taiwan against a Chinese invasion. I'll flag clearly that this is one think tank's assessment, not a confirmed Pentagon position, but it lines up with the broader direction independent analysts have been reporting all year. And the scale problem here isn't close to a fair fight. Some defense analysts project that China's military could launch missile campaigns numbering in the thousands of strikes per day in the opening phase of a Taiwan conflict, backed by an industrial base that could keep replenishing those missiles while the fighting is still going on. That's a war game projection, not a documented fact, but it's the scenario US planners are working from. Meanwhile, some of the exact American systems needed to intercept them, interceptors like SM-3 and THAAD, are estimated by CEA's analysis to take 3 to 8 years to rebuild to pre-Iran war levels. Think about the timeline that creates. If a crisis over Taiwan happened in the next 2 or 3 years, the US could be heading into it with a weaker version of the exact toolkit it just proved it doesn't have enough of. That's not speculation about China's intentions, that's just math about American inventory. And it's the reason the Pentagon is now scrambling to lock in contracts for several times more interceptors than it used to buy in a normal year. So this is really the punchline of the entire video. Iran wasn't just a war in its own right. It was a live stress test of the exact system America would need for a conflict that actually keeps its planners up at night. And the test results are now sitting on desks in the Pentagon, in Beijing, and honestly in Warsaw too. Which brings us to the real question underneath everything we've covered today. Not is America declining, but something more specific and more useful. The new age of American power. Let's go back to the question I asked you at the very start. If America can win almost every battle, why can't it seem to win the war? Here's the answer, and it's more interesting than America is weak because That's just not true. This war proved the opposite in a lot of ways. American precision strike capability is still the best on the planet by a wide margin. Nothing about this video has been an argument that the US military can't fight or can't win engagements. The real story is a different one. Destroying targets and achieving political outcomes are two separate problems, and the US just relearned that the hard way. In a war against a country a fraction of its size and resources, winning decisively against Iran required expending a dangerous share of the exact stockpiles it would need for a much bigger fight. And the ability to hit back cheaply at range in large numbers is no longer something only great powers can do. Iran has it, Ukraine has it, even the Houthis have some version of it. That list is only going to get longer. So the honest conclusion isn't that America is falling behind, it's that the price of staying on top just went up, sharply, and in ways that money alone can't instantly fix. Because you can't buy back years of THAAD production time, no matter how large the check is. American sanctuaries haven't disappeared. They've become contested in a way they weren't a decade ago. The cost of defending against cheap mass-produced weapons is climbing faster than the cost of building them. And allies who used to assume unconditional backup are now quietly building their own alternatives, whether that's Poland's own missile shield or Ukraine's own missile factories. None of that is collapse. It's a much harder, much more expensive version of the world America built after World War II, and how it responds to that over the next few years is going to shape everything from Taiwan to Eastern Europe far more than anything that happened in Iran itself.